Hi everyone, this video is about setting up the skin shader for Octane. Now Octane does not have a dedicated skin material, so what we have to do is kind of build our own using the random walk medium. The first part of this tutorial will be about setting up the model, and I'll provide the link below where you can download it. And the second part will discuss how to set up the skin shader. So if you want to know how I set up the skin shader, you can go straight to the second half of the video. So let's get started. I am using the model from 1024. It's a free head scan model, and I will provide a link at the bottom so that you guys can download it and follow along with the tutorial. Alright, so we're going to start 3ds Max, and once you have it started, you're going to import all the objects. It's either going to come in FBX or OBJ. I'll show you the directory it will possibly look like. Now I'm going to show you the OBJ directory here. We're going to go to the head folder, and in the head folder you'll find the head object, 3 eyelashes, and 3 brows. And what I did is when I brought them into 3ds Max, I combined all the eyelashes and brow into one object. And that's because it was going to use one material, and basically to simplify my scene I just combined it all together. And the next thing you're going to do is bring in the head here, and the final object is the jacket. And once you bring it in, you should have lashes, which in this case I'm combining it all together, the head, and the leather jacket. And once you have that, you have to set up the materials for it. So I'm gonna show you what I have right now. So basically I have 3 materials and a texture for the environment. So right here will be the material for the head, this will be the material for the jacket, and this is the material for the hair and brow. But we're gonna start over from scratch just to make it easy for everyone to follow along. So I'm just gonna delete everything and start over. Okay, so we're going to open up the material editor and bring that into view here. And I'm going to make it take up half the screen. And we're going to open up the Octane viewport. Maybe I should have done that first. Hold on a second. And I'm going to drag it and dock it to the top half here, the left half. And here's the material editor, slate material editor. Speaking is hard. Okay, I'm gonna dock this to the right side of the screen. And right now I've dragged in a universal material, and I applied it to all my objects. So this is basically our starting point. We have nothing applied. Everything is using the universal material, and that's not correct. So what we want to do is, let's name this head. So we want one material for the head. I'm going to duplicate it by holding down Shift and dragging it out. And this one I'm going to name jacket. I'm going to hold down Shift and drag it out again. And this one I'm going to name hair. Okay, so we got our 3 materials, and I'm gonna apply it to the objects using the, let's see, I'm just gonna use the selection here. So select the eyebrow, select the hair material, and then apply it. Assign material to selection. You can hit that. And you know what, let's make it a different color so it's a little bit easier to recognize in the viewport. For now, let's just assign it a, let's see, RGB. Let's just make it blue. This green. Green. Let's make this really blue. And we'll make the first one red. Okay, let's assign it. Let's see. Lashes, this has already been assigned, I think. Yeah, it's blue. Red is assigned to everything right now, so that's fine. And then the jacket, let's select the jacket. We will assign it here. And there we go. So the next thing we're gonna do is bring in the textures and connect it to our material. Now, this is not exactly a PBR texture set that comes with this model, but I'm gonna go over what textures it comes with and how we're going to make it work with the universal material. Okay, let's take a look at the texture folder. So we're gonna start at the free plus head. That's the folder with the I guess that's the unzip folder with your model and your textures. And from there, we're gonna go to JPEG textures, head, JPEG. So it comes with AK texture sets, and I dumped that into the original folder, and it's AK. But you know, AK is too big for my needs, and I wanted something a little bit lighter and less resource intensive. So I actually put it into a photo editing program and just batch convert it down to 4K. So we have a 4K folder here. 4K, 4K. Okay, good. And what we're gonna do is let's go over these textures here. So the cavity is something that comes from ZBrush, and we're not going to use that. What we're going to use is the color, gloss, and normals. And the reason why I'm skipping all these other files, you could use it if you like, but I don't really see a need to use translucency, for example, because we're doing actual subsurface scattering that will take into account the thinness of the model, and then will provide proper subsurface scattering through it, such as light bleeding through the thin parts of the ears. And the spec, we're just going to provide our own spec because I guess we could use this and just use the luminance value, but it just complicates things, and we're just going to keep it out. The micro normals is for when you get really close to the skin and you want to see all the fine wrinkles. We're not going to get that close. So again, to keep it easy and simple, we're just going to leave that out. Same thing with cavity. So really it's just these three texture files. Color, gloss, and normal with subdivision 1. Okay, we're going to start bringing the textures now into the material editor. I'm going to drag this down so you can see how it affects the actual render. Let's see, I can make this like that. Drag this down here. And in order for this to work in Octane, we need to use RGB image nodes instead of the bitmap. I think you could use bitmap too, but it's not, I think, fully implemented yet correctly. So we're gonna just use RGB because it's a native solution and we know it works. We're gonna go to general, no, sorry. We're gonna go to Octane and we're gonna go to image and we're gonna drag out RGB image. Now what you can do also, if you don't want to dig through all those drop-down menus, is that you can just type in RGB here, and it'll just narrow it down to anything that says RGB, and then you can just drag it out too, that way. And let's see. So what we're going to do is grab our folder here and drag it into the file name slot, and we have it loaded up. This bigger, and from here the color goes into the albedo. Just make it a little bit easier to read here, and we're going to drag the gloss into the next RGB. Now actually we're not going to use the RGB for this one because the gloss is actually a black and white image, so we're going to use a grayscale image node instead. And the reason why we do that is because it'll save us on VRAM. So we'll have that loaded up, and then we'll drag that into the file name, and then we'll connect that. Now, since it's gloss affects the reflectivity of the surface. As you can see here, it's really, really shiny. But it works very similar to PBR roughness, but inverted. So we're gonna plug into roughness and we're gonna make sure to invert it. So let's see, grayscale here, and we'll click invert. So the grayscale image is actually linear color space because it's actually a texture file that represents data, not really color information. So we need to set the gamma to 1, so the information is linear. The next thing we're going to do is bring in the normal. And the normal is actually a color map, so we're going to use RGB image for that. Let me have that. Let's drag it in here. Okay, and we're going to plug this into normal. And let's see, let's make sure that this is updating. Did it update? We're going to plug this into normal. And we're going to also make sure that the gamma is set to 1 because, again, this is a data texture file. It's not a texture file that represents color. Let's see here. I don't think it's updating, so we're going to have to refresh it manually. Oh, there you go. We're getting all this fine detail on the skin. Okay, that's great. So the next thing we're going to do for the head is change the eyebrow color. I'm getting weirded out by the blue here. Let's make it normal. So let's see the color of his hair. So yeah, let's go with black or slightly brownish black. So let's do that here. Let's just make it like 5. 5 is good. And we're gonna make it, instead of Octane, we're gonna make it GGX. Let's do that for all of them. GGX is the newer BSDF model. And for simplicity, we're just gonna go with GGX. All right, so now we have the skin and the hair set up. I haven't applied a subsurface medium to it yet, so everything looks a little bit hard, especially with that shiny nose. And let's go on and set up the jacket, the leather jacket. So with this, I'm gonna zoom out a little bit more here. Got that green jacket. We're gonna go to our folder. We're gonna back up to the jackets folder, 4K. And let's take a look at what files we have here. So it's pretty much the same here. We're going to use color, gloss, and normal. Now, it also provides a spec map here. I'm not sure if I want to use it. We could try, but I don't think it's actually necessary in this example. I mean, I guess the shoulder would be rougher and therefore less reflective, and we could use this to give it an additional level of realism, but for consistency's sake we didn't do it for the face, so I'm not going to do it for the jacket either. Okay, so it's the same idea. We got RGB, grayscale, and normal, which is RGB. So I'm just going to copy this over by holding down shift and dragging it out. I'm going to plug it in. And of course, it's not the right texture, but let's see. We're gonna fix that now. Color goes here. Yeah, looks much better already. Gloss, select that. Gloss goes here. Okay, and the normal. Let's see. Normal goes here. All right. So far, so good. Now we need to make sure the normal is correct, meaning that the G channel is basically either inverted or not. And if it looks weird, all you have to do is flip the green channel. Now inside the RGB image node, it doesn't give you an option to do that, just the green channel. You can invert the entire image, but we want to invert just the green channel. And if you want that, you can actually go to your, let's see, Octane library, live library here. Live database library, I should say. Let's drag this back up. And you can go to LiveDB, Octane procedural textures, utilities, and you have channel inverter. I believe I wrote this. Anyway, so we drag that out. Actually, we can't drag it out. We have to import it. Let's do that. And after it's imported, it actually dumps it into the classic material or the compact material editor. And so we have to go back to Slate material editor, and it should be in one of the sample slots here, and drag it out. Create an instance. And you can plug it into the input and then wire it to the normal. We're just checking out the jacket right now. And once you have that selected, there's an option that says channel to invert R. Normally, it's just the G channel that you need to flip. It's either DirectX or OpenGL. And depending on which one you use, the G channel is inverted. So you can just kind of flip it to see if it looks all right. Sometimes you have to like change the angle a bit to see which one looks better. Okay, let's try the other one. Let's try without the G channel. Go directly in. You know what? You see the stitching here? It starts looking like kind of weird here. So I think it looks better without inverting the G. There you go. See? That looks proper. So we're just going to go without the channel invert. Delete that. Okay. Let's zoom out, and we're done with this. All right, let's set up the skin properly now. So I set up a 3-point light setup here so that we can get a strong backlight, because what I want to try to do is try to get some light going through the ears. Let's get a little bit closer. Right now, no light is going through the ear. So I think his nose is a little bit too shiny for me. And overall his skin is just too reflective. And that's something we need to keep in mind, that in the material for skin is not as shiny as a hard surface object. So what we want to do is drag down the specular. Right now it's set to 1. Start with 0.5. Okay, that looks better. I believe that skin is normally lower than 0.5. So you might have to go down to even like 0.15. But I want a little bit of shine, so maybe we'll go with 0.3. And to me, that looks pretty good. So let's stick with that. Now for the jacket, let's see what the specular level. So this defaults to 1, but I really think that it should default to 0.5. 0.5 is actually a good default level, but I'm not sure why it starts at specular at 1. I think that just makes everything too shiny. Now hair has a thin layer of oil on it, right? That's coming out from the pores. So we can make it a little bit more shiny here. So I'm just gonna leave it at 1 for now because it just looks good the way it is right now. So I'm not gonna touch it. That doesn't look too bad, right? Now, a lot of the reason why this head model looks so good is because it's really detailed. We're talking about the pores. The normal matte is adding a lot of details in terms of bumps on the skin. We have a lot of texture details, right? We have like, we can see the dark patches in the skin, the blemishes, and the wrinkles. All of that adds to a very, very nice and realistic model. But to make it look better, we need to add subsurface scattering. And here's what we're gonna do. So the first thing you're gonna do when you set this up is to make sure that the universal material here is translucent. So we're gonna go to transmission and set that to a value of 1. Now it's kind of acting like a diffuse glass, and that's okay. That's what we want. And the transmission type is not glass, but some type of like a diffuse surface. And so we got that set up. And the next thing we're gonna do is add a medium for subsurface scattering. And we're gonna use random walk. So let's go, let's see. It's not an operator. It's under medium. We're gonna do random walk. Drag that out. And we're gonna plug that into medium. And we're gonna change the albedo. And we're gonna change the radius. The albedo and the radius kind of works hand in hand together. You can define the color of the albedo, let's say red. Okay, sorry, it wasn't updating. So once in a while you can see Octane not update, and that's probably just a glitch. And if you run into that, all you have to do is just refresh it, and that'll get you going again. So because the viewport was frozen when I was changing it, I'm gonna reset this back to none so you can see what it looks like before. And you can see that with the albedo plugged in, you can see the albedo color there mixed with the subsurface color. And right now the subsurface color is set to none, which is really a default value of a, I think 0.7 for the gray value. So we're just gonna change that. And I had it set to red before, that's why it's changing to red. But if you change the color here, you can see that it's mixing with the albedo. So this white color here is mixed with the albedo. And if you change it to red, it's just, you know, enhancing the albedo also. And then the radius, it's how light travels through the medium and comes out on the other side. So if you just use a grayscale value, you can see that the light traveling through the ears come out as white, which is not what we want, right? Because we have blood in here, so we have to kind of pick a color that represents blood. So I guess we'll just use red here. And that works better. Now it's set, the density here defines how much light passes through. The thicker it is, the less, I guess, light travels through the medium. So just to demonstrate, if we use 10, you can tell this is starting to become too translucent, obviously. And if we scale it up, it starts becoming more and more solid. 100, let's try 200. And I think there's too much light going through the air, so let's go to 300. Let's go to 500. And 500 looks good to me. Keep in mind, if you have something plugged into the albedo in the universal material, it's not gonna be quite subsurface, and I'll tell you why. And let's unplug it first. And let's make this a white color. And let's make this blue so we can see that better. Now let's make it purple. Okay, so you see a little bit of the purple bleeding through. And that's because it's using a default grayscale value of 0.7, I believe. But if you make the albedo completely white, there's no subsurface, or the translucency disappears. So in a sense, the albedo regulates the transmission. The darker the albedo, the more translucent it'll be. And if we change the color to black, now our surface is translucent. So if you stick the albedo into here, the darker areas of the texture will actually become more translucent. And the brighter area of the skin will become, I guess, more solid, right? And we don't want that. So we're just not gonna plug the color texture into the albedo here anymore. We're just going to make it black so that everything is translucent, and we're going to regulate that through the medium by the density. I mean, if we reduce it, it becomes more translucent, and if we increase it, it becomes more solid. So instead of plugging it in there, we're going to plug the albedo here in the medium. By doing that, we have just defined the color of the subsurface skin. Of course, we have the radius set to purple, so it's just not looking correct. We want to change this to red for the blood. And it's just too strong right now, so we're going to dial it back. Oops, wrong one. So we're going to dial it back, but we're going to dial it back using saturation. And we want to dial back enough to let the red shine through the ears, but not so red that actually changes the skin color to red. And 185 looks pretty good. All right, so by doing this process, we actually have the entire skin as a subsurface object instead of being modulated by the albedo plugged into the universal material. That's why we want to make that completely black, so it's not modulating any part of that. All right, so now that that's set up, you can look at the model now. Now it has a proper subsurface skin with some translucency going through the ear, and the rest of the skin is actually a little bit softer. What you will notice through this method is that the skin looks a little bit darker. I'm not exactly sure why that is. Maybe that is the correct way, because when the skin is absorbing light and scattering it in, it shouldn't be bouncing back the full reflectivity or the full value of the color, like if you were just setting up a hard surface. What you can do is that if you really want that the same brightness value as what you had before, is go into the RGB image and increase the power from 1 to 1.5, and it'll just brighten up the skin. So I'm just gonna take a snapshot of this and then compare it to what the RGB looks like before, so that we have a way to compare it. So let me do that. Disconnect the medium and plug this back into albedo. And I'm going to go to universal material and turn the transmission to 0. And you can see maybe my red was a little bit too much, so I'm going to save this one actually. Close this one. Use that as a reference. And I'm going to go back to what I had it set up before, which is albedo is black, or you can go to value, make it 0. Transmission is 1. Plug the medium back into universal material. And we have it, it's a little bit too red. So we're going to make it a little bit brighter. So again, with light hitting skin, it's going to absorb some of the light. So it won't be as bright as a PBR dielectric surface like this, but I believe it looks more realistic. So what you can do here, if you want the skin to be brighter, is increase the power of your lights. So that's what I'm going to do here. Let's see, which light is that anyway? That's light 1. Okay, let's do that. Yeah, normally, you know, I would recommend using dual monitors. One monitor for 3ds Max doesn't really quite cut the cake. All right, let's see. So I have it set to, let me see, 300 power. Let's do it at 500. And we'll take the second light, third light, I should say. We'll also increase that from 50 to, let's say, 75. And let's make it a little bit brighter. Let's make it 100. Make sure I have that selected. And that's it. So one thing I forgot to mention is that you want to set the bias in your random walk from 0.5 to 1. And what does that do? I will show you. Remember when we said that the color was a little bit darker because of the subsurface is absorbing more of the light? So this one allows a little bit more light to be reflected back instead of absorbed. So if it was at 0.5, you can see that the skin tone is a little bit darker. But when we set it to 1, it becomes a little bit brighter. So that's important for setting the skin tone up. It'll still be darker than the PBR version, but it's at least gets you a little bit closer. So you guys let me know what do you think about this method and how I set my material up. I'm gonna full screen this so you can see what it looks like. That's the setup. Make sure random is set like this. Make sure your RGB value power is 1.5. Look at universal material. Most important part is make sure transmission is 1 and albedo is set to 0, or the color black if you decide to use the color input. Oh yeah, one last thing is to make sure that your specular is set to a value of 0.3 or even less than that. Alright, that's it. This is the final result of the skin shader. And if you have any comments or questions, please write it down below and I'll try my best to respond to everyone. Alright, thank you.